Okay, so we are continuing. Stop! Change of plans! So, you guys decided, nuh-uh, and now we're making this anime classroom. You also voted to not just focus on the shaders, so in this tutorial we will cover more than 10 tips and techniques I used in making this classroom. If you are pro at modeling and setting up your scene, you may skip this tutorial. But you guys must mention in the comments whether or not you want a detailed tutorial series on the textures of the scene, or you just want an overview of the main textures. But enough dilly-dallying, let's go make a classroom. Building tip 1. Start with low geometry for all your models. For me, it's easier to add more later if there is any need for it, but if there's a lot to begin with in your model, it could get a bit tedious to clean it up later on. That's why when I brought in the circle, I lowered the vertices from 32 to 16. Building tip 2. If you want to easily extrude something at an angle, position your cursor over that area you want it to be and press Ctrl then right click. This could save you a few seconds or even a few minutes if you wanted to extrude something at an awkward angle. Building tip 3. If you want to make a face straight on a certain axis, just select that face and type S for scale and then the axis, for me it is X, so SX, and then press 0. It will become flat. This will align that face to not be rotated on that axis at all and therefore make it straight. Building tip 44. I mentioned this a few times already in some other tutorials, but the modifier is one of your best friends when modeling. Use it and make sure you delete the faces between the original and duplicated mesh. If you don't, that will cause some problems later with the loop cuts and textures and all that stuff. Also, if you want the two sides to stick together, enable this clipping selection in the modifier. Building tip 66. Use proportional editing by pressing O if you want to move certain parts of your mesh without making it look too abrupt. This proportional editing gradually edits the selected parts as well as the surrounding parts of your mesh, as can be seen over here. If you scroll the middle mouse wheel, it will make the area of effect even bigger. Building tip 73. If you're using a plane, make sure you model out the general shape first before you extrude it, because it'll save you a lot of time in the future. Because if you don't shape it before extruding it, you'll have to shape the entire mesh, which is not just a plane anymore, it's now a 3D object, so it'll be more difficult to edit. Building tip 8. Bring in a shape at least once to see the scale of your asset, maybe once you finish modeling, because as you can see, for example, my object is way too big, so I have to size it down a bunch. That could cause multiple problems in your scene if your object is too big, because you don't want to have to scale up everything you bring in whenever you bring anything in due to the sizes of your meshes. It might be lighting issues or shadow issues or stuff like that. Building tip 0. If you want to slide a vertice or edge smoothly across the model, double tap G. This is a real helper if you want to edit the edges of your model without manually trying to carefully slide them around. Building tip 9. This is a very important one. If you're making an environment and there's a model you'll have to duplicate a bunch of times, or a bunch of models you'll have to duplicate a bunch of times, make an instance out of it. You do that by putting your selected objects in a collection. The hotkey is to press M, then typing the name of that collection. Then after they're in a collection, you press Shift A, go to the selection instance at the bottom of this tab, and choose that collection that you just made. Now you got an instance of that collection. An instance is basically a linked duplicate of those objects that you put in that collection. So if you edit or add anything to that collection, the instance will change as well. And it will also be less taxing on your PC. So, very important, especially if you have a lot of the same thing in your scene. Breaking news! There's a crazed maniac screaming about an anime classroom available on his Patreon. Authorities have apprehended the fellow and he will be sent to the madhouse to undergo rehabilitation. That's all for now. More in the next edition of Tutorial News. Now, our first scene tip. Scene tip the first. Always shape your floor of your environment or your room before extruding the walls and the roof. If you don't shape the floor the way you want it to be before extruding the walls and the roof, it'll take longer to edit the entire shape once there are walls and a roof. Remember, if it's a plane, it's easier to edit the plane rather than editing a 3D object. So just for it to be easier, shape the plane. Also, usually I block out the scene at the beginning of an environment, but there's very little in the scene, so there's no need for that. If you feel like blocking out the scene, then so be it. Scene tip 2. This is something I always mention, especially if you're a beginner. Use a reference to position your camera. If you got a reference, you can judge how to rotate your camera and where to place it. Also, for wide environments, I usually set the focal length to 35, and for close-ups, it's around 50 to 55. Scene tip 3.3. If you want to easily model and place the objects of your scene in your room, duplicate the room, then hide the one you'd like to keep. Then delete the roof of that duplicated room, and now you have a placeholder room to see the dimensions of your environment, but you can also now move around your models without having the hassle of dodging the roof. Alternatively, you can also just add the roof afterwards, but whatever. Scene tip the last. Before texturing, I'd recommend adding your primary light source. This light will always influence how you shade, especially in an NPR environment. Over here, I made the windows transparent since the light will be coming from the windows. I'll now be closing the back of the room since we're done modeling the environment, and also the sun is influencing the entire environment from the back since there is no wall behind the camera. So I'll add that. That's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and learned something from all of the tips. I want to give a special thank you for everyone on the Patreon, and I want to give a special thank you for watching. But that is it for me today. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one. Alright, bye.